Hello and welcome to the Winston Marshall Show with me, Winston Marshall, and a special welcome to the over 100,000 new subscribers who have joined since my debate with Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi at the Oxford Union. A very warm welcome. It seems that most of you are tuning in from America. And so I would like to give a special welcome to you deplorables, you rednecks, you hillbillies, you populists. Welcome to the Winston Marshall Show. This is a home for you. Today, I want to talk about insurrection. But first, if you want to support the show, all you have to do is press subscribe. If you press the subscribe button, I can explore more important issues like this one and bring on more fascinating guests. Let's get straight into it. For 4 years, Democrats have been telling us how much they care about insurrection.
He incited an insurrection.
Insurrection.
An insurrection.
The insurrection.
An insurrection.
Insurrection.
Democrats and the establishment tell us over and over that Jan 6th was the worst day in American history. Worse even than 9/11. Now, before we go any further, just so that we're all on the same page, let's have a quick definition of insurrection. A violent uprising against an authority or government. Whatever your position on Jan 6th, who could possibly deny it was a dark day for America? 2 people were killed, 2 others died of a heart condition. But here begins the Democrat double standard when it comes to insurrection. Let me explain. This week marks the 4-year anniversary of the violent anarchy and riots in Portland, Oregon. The riots which escalated to insurrection of the Hatfield Federal Courthouse and the Justice Center by the beginning of July. After the death of George Floyd, there were over 120 consecutive nights of violence in Portland. You remember how CNN covered it?
Which were largely peaceful demonstrations.
Even though CNN thought it was mostly peaceful, I remind you that by the end of October 2020, over 25 Americans had been killed in the political unrest across the country. But today I want to talk specifically about Portland, Oregon. So let's see how the New York Times covered the insurrection there.
Federal officers in military gear, clouds of tear gas, crowd control munitions, and locals who want those officers gone.
What are you guys protecting? Get the out of our city!
In just over a week, the chaotic scenes in Portland grabbed the nation's attention and raised questions about whether the US government is exceeding its authority and violating civil rights.
That's not the first question that comes to my mind. The first question that comes to my mind is, why exactly was there violence on the streets of Portland? Why exactly were federal law enforcement called there in the first place? Another question that comes to my mind is that why didn't the New York Times give any context to that reporting? Why didn't they show a little bit of what had happened in the previous month? The Democrat and establishment narrative was that these were peaceful protests, non-violent protests that were suddenly escalated by Trump sending in the federal law enforcement. To me, it seems like the narrative completely crumbles by the very fact that the violence had begun as early as the end of May 2020, before even law enforcement had arrived. Let's refresh our memory on the event itself. Portland protests declared a riot Sunday as federal building is breached. Portland protesters have caused $2.3 million in damage to federal buildings. Portland protesters barricade courthouse with federal officers inside, then try to set it on fire. Apparent Molotov cocktail explodes outside federal courthouse in Portland. And just in case you want to see it for yourself, here's some more footage.
You've got people trying to set fires. It took about 10 to 15 minutes for them to up the ante and declare it a riot.
Around 12:30, protesters again showed up on the west side of the federal courthouse, this time trying to set a fire to the outside of the building.
Now, Sky News from the mainstream media did cover it, and I'll give them credit. They did better than the New York Times, who in their video that you've already seen, very much one-sided the whole thing, pro-insurrectionist, anti the government, anti-law enforcement. Sky News at least tried to both sides it.
What was a largely peaceful protest has escalated into violence.
The main battle line is here, outside the federal courthouse. Protesters unable to pull down the new fence.
Protesters aren't able to pull down the fence. Isn't the story that they're trying to pull down the fence, not that they're not able to?
Throw fireworks over. Tear gas is fired back. Many here are prepared for this.
I thought these were mostly peaceful protests.
Peaceful protests.
Largely peaceful.
And yet here we see people going to the federal courthouse, quote, prepared for this, or as it seems to me, prepared to fight.
But crowds have only grown since federal troops arrived here.
So more people are turning up to lead the insurrection against the federal courthouse. On a lighter note, I was very pleased with this interview.
Do you think this violence is undermining your cause?
You know what? I don't believe in violence at all, but unfortunately, you gotta make noise.
I don't believe in violence, no exceptions. But on this occasion,
You gotta make noise.
Democrats and progressives either ignored or supported this particular insurrection. And it seems they haven't changed their mind in the 4 years since. I had the pleasure of debating Madame Pelosi at the Oxford Union. Of course, some of you will remember. If you haven't seen it, it is on my channel. But if you haven't got time, here's a quick review from some lads down in Texas.
Did you see the Nancy Pelosi debate with the dude from Mumford &
No,
Sons?
I still haven't watched it.
He handed her.
In my exchange with Madame Pelosi, I challenged her to condemn the insurrection that lasted the entire month of June 2020. When I did so, she looked at me blankly. Now, to be fair, I actually made a mistake. It wasn't June 2020. It was the entire month of July 2020. But I don't think that's why she looked at me blankly when I asked her a second time to condemn what happened. No, I think she has a completely different understanding and narrative about what happened in Portland. In July 2020, Nancy Pelosi tweeted this about Portland, Oregon. Unidentified stormtroopers, unmarked cars, kidnapping protesters, and causing severe injuries in response to graffiti. These are not the actions of a democratic republic. The Department of Homeland Security's actions in Portland undermine its mission. Trump and his stormtroopers must be stopped. Pelosi reduces the entire insurrection of Portland to a bunch of kids spraying graffiti. Similarly, Biden, if you remember, said that Antifa was just an idea.
Antifa's an idea, not an organization.
Oh, you gotta be
not
kidding.
militia.
But let me save the best till last. The mayor of Portland at the time, Ted Wheeler, actually joined in.
It's not just residents who want them gone. The city's mayor, caught in the tear gas on Wednesday, has called them an occupying force.
The Democrat progressive narrative was that these were perfectly peaceful protests that were then escalated when federal and law enforcement were sent in by Trump. But here's another side of the story. Speaking at a Senate hearing later that same year, acting Homeland Security Deputy Secretary Ken Cuccinelli had this to say.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the Department of Homeland Security's role in protecting against the continued assaults by criminals and violent extremists in the city of Portland, and more specifically, the federal courthouse and the federal law enforcement officers there. For more than 60 days, the situation in Portland has devolved into nothing more than continuous nightly riots and life-threatening violence, targeting federal law enforcement and the institutions they diligently defend under the mandate given to them by Congress. These rioters have assaulted federal property, federal officers, local law enforcement personnel, and facilities with hammers, lasers, baseball bats, fireworks, Molotov cocktails, chemicals, and other weapons.
Cuccinelli had some very flattering things to say about my old friend, Nancy Pelosi.
Speaker Pelosi and another senior House Democrat have referred to federal law enforcement officers working for the Department of Homeland Security as stormtroopers and Gestapo. Are there any stormtroopers or Gestapo working for DHS right now?
No, Mr. Chairman, they're not, and it's an extremely negative and hyperbolic libel by those individuals on people who are doing their duty as professionally as they can, not just in Portland, but around the country.
Now, the Department of Homeland Security published a report in April 2021 synthesizing parts of both these narratives together. Here's what they said. The largest protest reported by Federal Protective Service involved 10,000 people near the Hatfield USCH, i.e. the Portland Federal Courthouse, and included some individuals throwing bottles and lighting fireworks in the direction of Portland Police Bureau officers. The vandalism and destruction to the Hatfield USCH, the Portland Federal Courthouse, included graffiti and broken windows. According to the FPS officials, damage to the Hatfield USCH caused by civil disturbance was approximately $1.6 million. The estimated cost of Operation Diligent Valor as of August 31st, 2020 was $12.3 million. But these were just innocent peaceful protesters antagonized by law enforcement, right? The report noted that as early as June 4th, to assist FPS in Portland, on June 4th, 2020, DHS began deploying officers, relying on its authority under 40 USC 1315.5. At that time, Trump wanted to send in federal law enforcement. On June 26, 2020, the president issued Executive Order 13933, protecting American monuments, memorials, and statues and combating recent criminal violence. The purpose of the executive order was to address a, quote, sustained assault on the life and property of civilians, law enforcement officers, government property, and revered American monuments. According to the executive order, quote, the Secretary of Defense, the Attorney General, and the Secretary of Homeland Security shall provide, as appropriate and consistent with applicable law, personnel to assist with the protection of federal monuments, memorials, statues, or property. On the same day, FPS created the draft operation plan, Operation Diligent Valor, to prevent, protect, respond to, and recover from attacks on federal property in FPS Region 10-7, which includes Portland. So on the one hand, we have either mostly peaceful protesters or a violent mob, and on the other hand, we have federal law enforcement trying to put down the violent mob, or we have violent law enforcement inciting that mob to insurrection. Now, you remember that fencing from earlier that they weren't able to take down.
Protesters unable to pull down the new fence.
Well, later in that period, Portland stopped and fined federal law enforcement from keeping up a fence to protect the federal courthouse. Unfortunately, the Department of Homeland Security report that you remember from April 2021 doesn't actually clear everything up. One of the allegations against the federal law enforcement is that they didn't have proper training. But this report found that they did have basic law enforcement training as outlined by the Attorney General guidelines. On the other hand, the report also said that some officers who'd been brought in from different departments did not have the appropriate legal briefing to deal with all situations. In other words, they didn't have insurrection training. But none of this undermines the fact that people went to the federal courthouse and tried to attack it and burn it down. That is the definition of insurrection, and there were people inside when they tried to do that. For all that happened, surely that is the salient issue. Why is that so hard for Democrats to condemn? Let me give you a counterexample. You will remember the death of Ashley Babbitt, who was killed on Jan 6th by Lieutenant Michael Byrd in the Capitol building. Michael Byrd was cleared and that it was determined that the killing was lawful and department policy. Now, an equivalency here would be that Michael Byrd was escalating tensions by killing her. But this is precisely the Democrat double standard. Now, I'm not suggesting that Michael Byrd escalated tensions on Jan 6th. What I'm saying is, why is it the Democrats have no hesitation to say that when federal law enforcement is sent to Portland, Oregon to protect the federal courthouse and the federal buildings, why is that considered escalation? But when law enforcement are protecting Congress and the Capitol Hill, as they did on Jan 6th, that is not considered escalation. That to me is the Democrat double standard. Why is it so hard to condemn what happened in Portland, Oregon? So the big question is, why is there a double standard? Is it because they're trying to use Jan 6th to stop Trump ever getting back into the White House? Is it because they actually support what happened in Portland and across America? Is it because they don't want to alienate the more extreme end of the progressive voting base? Is it because they're so blind by their self-righteousness, they think what happened at the Portland Federal Courthouse was a good thing? Maybe they actually support that insurrection. Or maybe it's because all of them are completely unprincipled. Now, have I got it right? Have I got it wrong? Is there a Democrat double standard? I want to hear from you. Let me know what you think I've missed. Let me know where you think I get it wrong. We are all on this journey together. If you want to support the show, all you have to do is press subscribe. If you press the subscribe button, I can explore more important issues like this one and bring on more fascinating guests. But for now, thank you and see you next time.